So hi everyone, my name is Rebecca, and I want to welcome you to our event, which is titled, Do You Have What It Takes to Survive the Infodemic? And this is an Infographic Design Incubator. So this event is brought to you by Core and Tidbit, and this workshop and infographic design competition, I'd like to say, is the very first of its kind, and we really hope that you enjoy the experience as much as we do. So Vicky and I are stoked to be your MCs for the evening, and just some housekeeping matters. We do ask that you keep your mics on mute and your cameras off just to not interfere with the Zoom bandwidth as the night progresses. And if you have any comments or questions, please type them out in the chat. And members of our team will be monitoring it as the event progresses. So this is our third event of the semester, and for those who may not know too much about us, I want to explain to you more about what CORE is all about. So CORE stands for Canadian Organization for Undergraduate Health Research, and some key aspects of our mission of our organization is that we really want to be providing a variety of diverse research opportunities to specifically underrepresented students here in the Western community, but also abroad. Through our events such as these, we hope to empower students with various skill sets that can be very useful and valuable for research. And perhaps another interesting and unique feature about CORE is that we are very passionate about publishing infographics, which are based on these literature reviews that we perform. And we do this because we are passionate about communicating science, and often it gets a bit complicated with all the jargon, but we want to be able to communicate this information to the lay audience so they can get a better understanding of the science around them. So what do you expect, or what will you gain from this event? So a couple, I like to say, sort of learning outcomes for the evening is that we really want you to come away from this event learning about and being able to apply important aspects of effective visual communication of science, and having this skill of communicating through visuals, and specifically infographics, is what we think a very competitive and in-demand skill that will set you up for a lot of important opportunities, whether it's in your career or even academia, because scientific communication is so important, and especially during times of COVID, and a topic I'll touch on later, the infodemic, these skills become extremely important and very timely. And lastly, we hope that through this event that you foster a spirit of collaboration and creativity, so you're able to gain insight from our amazing guest speakers and expertise from our collaborator Tidbit, as well as maybe bounce off ideas with your fellow peers or competitors, and really enjoy the spirit of visual communication in our event tonight.
Awesome, thanks Rebecca. So I'll be running through our agenda for the evening to tell you a little bit about how we'll be addressing those learning outcomes, so to speak. So as you can see, our event is split into two parts. So we'll be first running through the introduction to our co-hosting organization, so us as CORE, and also the people at Tidbit who are joining us tonight. And we will also be introducing you to our guest speaker, medical resident Sparsh. And we'll also give you some background context to the infodemic, as Rebecca said, and why it's so prominent today. So that's the first part. For the second part, we'll be kicking off the interactive workshop component by explaining the contest that you can all partake in, as well as demonstrating the Tidbit tool you can use to create your own infographics for scientific literature. We'll then break into breakout room. We'll then have Tidbit demonstrate the tool and have your questions answered about those tools, and move into breakout rooms after, so you can interact with all the mentors here based off of what skill set you would like to learn a bit more about. And yeah, so that will be our agenda. After the breakout rooms, we'll be regrouping and saying goodbye to all of you to end off the event for tonight.
Perfect. I'd just like to add one point. So before our breakout rooms, we'll be having, like Vicky mentioned, that Tidbit tutorial of how to use their amazing tool, but also a demonstration and quick talk by our Tidbit experts to look at two areas that are really important in infographic design. One is the design aspect, and the other part is understanding the scientific literature. And then the breakout rooms will be divided into those topics. So you can, as a participant or competitor, you can choose which breakout room you want to attend to get your very specific questions addressed. Awesome. Okay, so if you recall back in March, so this is near like the start of the pandemic, the Director General of the World Health Organization, and I hope I don't mispronounce his name, but Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, he stated in a press release, which I found was quite important, and quote, "We're not just fighting an epidemic here, we're fighting an infodemic." Now, what exactly is the infodemic? Well, according to the World Health Organization, the COVID-19 outbreak and response has been accompanied by a massive infodemic. So here we're seeing an overabundance or flooding of information. Some of it is accurate and some of it isn't. And that makes it especially hard for people to find, people like you and I, to find trustworthy sources and reliable guidance when we need it, especially to make important decisions. So living in a digital age of social media, whether you go on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok even, we're all constantly being exposed to a huge amount of COVID-19 related information on a daily basis. And some say that because it's information, whether it's accurate or not, is being spread so fast, it often travels faster than the virus. So if we choose to focus on our understanding and characterization of the infodemic, we can look at it in two branches. And the first one is the information overload. And so recently, the Pan American Health Organization, they published a number of fact sheets, and I just want to highlight some of the statistics that they emphasize in terms of the extent and severity of this information overload. So for example, between the months of just April to May, we're seeing over 361 million COVID-19 related YouTube videos that were uploaded. And since January, we're seeing over 19,200 COVID-19 related articles that are being published and available in Google Scholar. And you can imagine that these numbers are still growing. And in terms of like Twitter tweets, we can see that since even in just in the month of March, we're seeing over 550 million tweets. So you can just see in this arm of the infodemic, the amount of information that we're being flooded with or inundated with is quite intense, and that in itself can be very challenging to navigate. So if we choose to characterize the infodemic at another branch, so looking at misinformation, so these can include like fake news, conspiracy theories, rumors, among the like, and they're being spread very, very quickly on the media, and this has often led to very serious consequences and even harmful health behaviors in the public. So I'll just give some examples here. Maybe you guys are already familiar, but back then, I think it was around March, there was this huge panic on food, whether food and other important supplies would be available, and a lot of people, based on certain rumors, they started panic buying and stockpiling a lot of food. I think not just food, toilet paper, for example. So in some countries, it did actually cause a shortage. In other countries, unfortunately, in Iran, many hundreds of citizens did die because they believed in this false rumor about drinking methanol and how it could help you cure you or treat you from the coronavirus, and that's absolutely not true. And then perhaps something a bit more closer to home or down south in the States, before the whole clinical trials came up with hydroxychloroquine, there's still a lot of unknowns about whether this drug is effective in treating COVID-19 or not. And unfortunately, we did have an individual who did take a fish tank cleaner, and it contained the chloroquine, and he did pass away from that. So there's a lot of misinformation that's circulating around, and based on these examples I provided, some of these cases resulted in tragic deaths, and you already start to see the sort of negative impact that the infodemic has had on human health, and not to mention the toll on our mental health, and especially for marginalized populations, misinformation and information overload, those can also intensify or exacerbate stigma, fear, and racism for those populations. So misinformation and information overload also presents a lot of challenges for healthcare institutions, governments, to disseminate accurately and very quickly reliable health information. And from the individual's standpoint, when we're flooded with so much information, it's pretty challenging to look for and navigate for reliable health and scientific information. So part of the question here is then, how do we as students in science or healthcare practitioners, scientists, or any members of the healthcare and science field, how do we go about communicating relevant and reliable information in accessible ways during health crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic? So I just found these two articles published quite recently, a couple of months ago, but the authors here, essentially the key take-home point that they talk about they say there's there's a need to improve health communication messages in an environment such as social media that's already flooded with a lot of information that's not necessarily useful or accurate. And here they highlight the use of visuals, especially infographics, can really help to enhance health communication to the public, bridge gaps in literacy. And the infographics, as the authors suggest, is a useful tool to rapidly disseminate science and health information to lay audiences in a simple and accessible visual format. So just to hammer in the message about the infographics in communicating science, we know that infographics can be an effective tool to present complicated or complex data in a visual format that is very compelling and visually appealing. So sometimes you hear, infographics do have that sort of power in small text and images, but really they're taking advantage of the power of our brain's capacity to process visual information a lot better than relying on text alone. So by integrating or combining, text, illustrations, and diagrams in a very visually appealing and engaging manner, research information and health information can be conveyed to a variety of audiences, especially the general public. So that's sort of the background that I wanted to provide about, what the infodemic is, the role and benefits that infographics and visual communication play. And I think through this event, we really hope that you see why we're holding this event and how you as a competitor and your designing of your infographics, you can also take a stand against the infodemic. So that's all for me, and I'd like to pass it back to Vicky.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for such a terrific introduction. That was super well researched. I was really impressed. I hope everyone gained that better understanding for why we really wanted to run an event like this. Next, I would like to introduce Apple and Bernie, who are our senior graphic designer and director of graphic design, respectively, for Core London. So they will talk to you a little bit about their experience leading to the creation of these beautiful infographics you will see for literature reviews on our various social media platforms.
Thank you, Vicky, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Apple.
And my name is Bernie.
And we are two of the graphic designers for Core. So starting this summer and throughout the school year, we have been working on two infographic publications. They're called Staying Current with COVID and The Insight.
Yeah, so Staying Current with COVID is a project that we at Core took during the summer. And we realized that with the rapid development of our understanding of COVID-19, it can be difficult for the general public to find up-to-date, reliable, and relevant information. And so as such, the goal of this infographic is to summarize key scientific findings regarding COVID-19 and present in a way that anyone can understand as a way to combat misinformation.
Sorry, Rebecca, could you click next on the slide, please? Thank you. So once the school year started, we actually started a new project called The Insight. So this project has a similar goal as Staying Current with COVID. However, the topics we focus on, instead of being purely COVID-19, are advising student life with science or whatever is trending in the community at a given time. So you can find all of our infographic publications on our Instagram and Facebook if you're interested in seeing more.
Yeah, so moving on, our design process starts with the wonderful team of literature reviewers at Core. So they work together to identify and research interesting topics and to summarize relevant literature for each issue. And all of the information is then compiled into a document, which is used by the graphic design team to create the graphics that you can see today.
So the first thing that us graphic designers do is we read through the document to gain an understanding of the topic and to ask any questions to the literature review team if needed.
Once we understand each part, we will then start to brainstorm the layout. And so we feel that the layout is one of the most important aspects of design since it ties in together all the different pieces of information on the graphic. So we will often take special care to ensure that it is organized and logical, and we'll often even sketch out a preliminary idea and adjust it until we're satisfied.
Yep. And if we are stuck, we'll sometimes use Google or Pinterest to search for possible designs and use that as inspiration for our own.
So after the general layout is planned out, we will then start to brainstorm any graphical components that can be included on the graphic. So this can take the form of timelines, diagrams, or even graphs. And so the goal of adding these features is to help readers understand the text that they're reading. And so some of these graphical elements can be found on the slide as an example.
We also take special care to ensure that the color of the infographics are visually appealing and that the overall infographic is pleasing to look at. So these aspects of design are key to drawing the attention of viewers and to increase the likelihood that they will read it.
So after the first iteration of design, there will always be some elements that require further revision. A very common issue that we have is the clutter of information, which can make it more difficult for readers to understand the process of the infographic. We'll
often also make sure that the spacing of text and elements are appropriate and that there is logical flow of information, which makes reading through the information on the page easy and natural. We also make sure to add in key graphical elements to properly support the text, so to help aid the reader's understanding and digestion of the information.
So when you guys make your infographics, don't be afraid to just jump into it and experiment with everything.
Most of the time that we spend creating the graphics is spent on redesigning elements and trying out ideas to find out what looks good. So yeah, don't be afraid to just play around. We'll be around if you have any questions during the designing process.
Good luck.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that brief overview of your experience designing infographics on core side and walking through much of what the delegates will be doing tonight. Yeah, thank you so much, Apple and Bernie. Next, I would like to introduce our guest speaker for tonight, Sparsh Shah, who is a medical resident who graduated from the University of Toronto and a co-founder of Tidbit, our co-host organization for tonight. And he will be talking to you a bit more about that. So let's give a warm welcome to Sparsh.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. First of all, I want to say shout out to Core. Fantastic event, and thank you for having me. All the stuff that you just talked about previously, I don't even know how I can top that, but I'll give it my best shot. I'll start by telling you a little bit about me and then how we started Tidbit and what we're trying to do with Tidbit. So I was a 2016 Ivy grad, and then from Ivy, I started med school pretty much the same year. And then during med school, I started making infographics for a few different organizations. And I realized that it was just a better way to communicate information, especially because a lot of health and medicine was very text heavy. And although people did really good work, it was so hard for someone to keep up with all the information. And as I was about to graduate in this year, I knew that I was going to be practicing in emergency medicine. And the thing about Emerge is that the scope is so broad and there's so much information that needs to be learned that's always constantly updating that it was really difficult for me to at least stay on top of it because I knew I was starting, and this is around the time when COVID was also picking up. So some of the things that I was struggling with was trying to figure out what's the latest research on treatment algorithms for COVID. And when I'm in practice, what should I be doing? So I started off trying to just go through the literature, and I think the stat that you quoted about like 20,000 COVID papers have already been published. There's no way it would be able to stay up to date and keep up with all that information and filter it all, especially reading through these text-heavy papers. And I realized that, this is probably not a problem that I'm only facing. It's probably something that a ton of other people in the same shoes as me, and not just people just starting residency, because in medicine, you kind of have to stay on top of it all. Every day there's new research, and that new research informs the practice patch, informs what treatments you're going to give, it informs how you're going to do certain procedures. And the issue is that with all these great researchers outputting this information, none of it gets read. And a lot of it kind of stays sort of in the digital space, kind of hanging out there as a researcher goes on to the next project. And that's kind of the idea of when Tidbit came along, because I thought, what if there was a way to make it easier for people to digest all this information? And drawing on my experiences from Ivy and my experiences designing a few infographics, I thought that this would be a great way for people to be able to look at information, be able to digest it visually, and in a much faster way than they could having to read a full text article. And it improves health literacy, not just amongst people in healthcare, but there's also evidence that shows it improves health literacy amongst the general public and the general population. And so we got a team together and we started fleshing out this idea and seeing what's the best way to make infographics so easily available to people. And that's pretty much how Tidbit started, I would say just about 10, 11 months ago. And I think we can sort of flip over to the next slide and talk a little bit more. So like I said, the research that we found was that there's 600,000 papers published yearly. And I know not everyone's reading every paper, but even reading like 1% of this is a tall task for anyone, a busy student, med student, undergrad student, resident, or even a practicing doctor. And the other issue that we found was that it takes 17 years for all this information to really get applied in clinical practice. So for example, let's say a researcher did a lot of work, spent 2 years, figuring out this new drug that was actually more effective than the existing drug. For that information to actually be common and for everyone to start doing it, it takes a lot of time. And in those 17 years, that new drug could have helped a lot of people, could have saved a lot of lives. And it's not just applicable to just like medicine or different types of drugs. There's so many different types of interventions within healthcare where this happens. And because of this delay, people don't get the best care that they could, even though the information was out there. And so if we flip over to the next slide, the problem that we were trying to solve is how to better communicate all this information. And what we've noticed is that what researchers are doing right now to talk and collaborate is that they tweet new groundbreaking trials. But as you can imagine, once you tweet something, it's temporary, it stays up there for a little bit. And also, if you look at the example on the left side, it's really hard. Like, I don't know what to take away from this. I don't know if I'm even going to click it. This could be something super important that may be relevant to me, but it's just a lot of text and it's just not the ideal way to consume this information. And time again, medicine has relied on this archaic text-heavy way of showing information. And it's not keeping up with just trends within what people usually do. Now that we have Facebook, we have Instagram, a lot of reader attention is declining. People want information much more faster. They know there's a lot, so they want to be able to filter through things easily and be able to prioritize what they want to read and be able to learn it effectively and quickly. And if we flip over to the next slide, I'll show you exactly what Tidbit is doing. So what we try to do is we take these text abstracts, these large, dense paragraphs, and we try to convert them into these nice looking infographics. And as you can imagine, it is much easier to understand what's going on within that study through that infographic than it is trying to filter out the information in the abstract. And this could be for many reasons. Like for one, let's say I don't care about the entire background objectives. I just want to know the take-home points. It is much easier to scan to the bottom of this infographic, see where the conclusion is, and know what the take-home point is, versus having to read through the whole thing and trying to figure out where the information lives. So we've designed a platform where it's easier for people to take a paper and an abstract and convert it into an infographic. And what we're trying to do is we don't want to just end there. We want to make people be able to communicate this information and share them. So we're trying to build a social network where now that these infographics actually have a permanent place to live in our platform, people can send them to each other, they can like and comment on it, they can start discussing this information. And we anticipate that this would lead to a much more rapid dissemination of knowledge and more effective knowledge translation. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it much easier and much more effective for good information to reach the end user. And why specifically infographics? I think some of you might be wondering, because there's a lot of different form factors that we've gone over. We looked at text, we looked at videos, we looked at podcasts. And if you flip over to the next slide, we found a lot of overwhelming evidence that shows how powerful visual information is. And I think Core touched on this earlier, that people process visual information. It's just much more intuitive. We definitely understand things better with our eyes and if our eyes are directed effectively. And people have shown that infographics result in more engagement as well. It's what people like to read. It's just much more user-friendly. People seem to, and this includes clinicians, pretty much everyone, click on abstracts and full text more if they're accompanied by an infographic. We know that people remember information more if they're presented in an infographic form versus text form. And we also know that humans process information a lot faster. And that's essentially why we decided to go down this path of using infographics to demonstrate all this information. And what we're trying to do is trying to make it mainstream and trying to make it much more intuitive, effective, and easy for people to learn about infographics, to create them, and ultimately end up in clinical and medical practice. So that's a bit about what we're doing and a bit about me. I'm also happy to answer any questions, I believe is the next part of this, and can touch base on anything or whatever you guys want to talk about. I'm happy to chat.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for that brief run through, Sparsh. It's definitely super cool how you guys identified that problem and wanted to tackle it with the inception of Tidbit. So like our previous event, if you have attended those, we'll be having a Q&A session through the chat. So feel free to type any questions that you have for Sparsh on what he just said about Tidbit, on his career with medicine and entrepreneurship, or about any of the facts that we previously mentioned about the Infodemic into the chat, and we'll be moderating that and getting your questions answered. Oh, all right, okay. Alex has a question for Sparsh. So he is wondering, how are other medical professionals finding the usage of infographics during COVID based on your experience?
Great question. So like you said, this will probably be based on my experience rather than any sort of study or literature review that we've done. What I've seen is that infographics have been used for a whole host of different applications. We're specifically trying to focus on providing information to researchers, but I can tell you that we also sit on Ontario's COVID-19 modeling table. And what they're trying to use infographics for is to communicate information to policy and decision makers. So for example, the infographics that we generate for them, they're actually sent down to the government's cabinet, and it makes it easy for them to understand what the research shows and what doctors and the public health experts are recommending. So that's one application. There's also another group called COVID-19 Made Simple, and they're also, I believe, a group of medical students and residents who specifically focus on providing information to the general public about COVID-19 using infographics. In terms of specifically medical professionals, we've seen a lot of uptake in terms of our infographics that are related to COVID-19, especially right now because we're not a fully fledged social platform. What we've seen is that people would take our infographics that create on our platform and then share it on Twitter. And when they do that, they just get a lot more engagement. They get a lot more likes and a lot of people just commenting on this information. And what it leads to is more people reading the paper, understanding the information. And I can tell you that it's much more quicker because this is such an acute pandemic. When a new treatment trial comes out or a new therapy comes out, I've seen it in practice be applied a lot faster. And I think that's the goal of what we're trying to do with infographics, is to make the widespread use of this information much more accessible.
Oh, all right. We also have a question from Paula. So Paula says, hi, I have a question about the abstract information extraction. In terms of getting the information, how do you also recommend extending beyond the abstract to get a full picture and accurately convey the information? Or would that be another form of information overload in your opinion?
Great question. I think this is actually a really good question that our team has discussed internally quite a bit. And it's always a fine balance between trying to have a lot of information and trying to at least communicate and simplify the information that exists. And the reason we chose to specifically just stick to abstract is because we're not trying to replace what the full text demonstrates. Because even in abstract, you can ask a lot of researchers, and they would say that abstract doesn't convey all the nuances of a publication effectively. You can't really critically appraise a paper based on the abstract. The idea is just being able to filter the information and being able to communicate the take-home points. What we're trying to do is we're trying to use infographics as sort of a gateway to read the full paper if they're interested. So if I give you an example, let's say, like, for example, I'm an emerge resident, and I'm scrolling through a bunch of infographics, some of which are relevant to me, some of them not so much. If I find something that I think is clinically useful and helpful for my practice, what I would then do is read the infographic. I'd get a good idea of what's going on within the paper, and then I would try and read the entire paper and try to see how strong was the study, is it effective and beneficial to me, and can I apply this into clinical practice? So the reason why I would say we're not trying to put information more than the abstract into an infographic is because we want to first simplify the information, and sometimes less is more. So at Tidbit, we've kind of put it at a stopgate at the abstract because we feel that the abstract conveys enough information the author felt was essential to give someone an overview about the study. And then we link every infographic to the full text, so it's really easy for someone to view the full article, because the goal is to get them to read the full thing if they really want to apply this information to their practice. Does that answer the question?
Sorry. Personally, I think that made a lot of sense. Paula, I hope that answers your question. And Sparsh, yes, sorry. So Paula
Awesome.
just put into the chat. That's a really good point that she hadn't thought of, and thank you for clarifying. And I totally agree. Yeah, thank you for taking the time to answer that. We also have a question from Catherine, and Catherine says, hey, I was wondering if there was a science behind creating something that's visually engaging. I find a lot of time that even within the sphere of graphics and infographics, there are just some that don't do the job as well as they could.
Great question. So the thing is, with infographics, they're an art. And if you look at sort of our tagline, our Tidbit's tagline is the art of medicine. And it's pretty tough to apply science to an art. And I would say that even medicine in and of itself, we're told, is also an art, because although there can be sort of structures and protocols and logic to do something, sometimes it involves a lot of creativity. I think what I've seen is that a lot of designers have their own skill set, and a lot of designers have their own styles. Me personally, I like to keep things simple. And what I like to do is I try to sort of bold key points and key elements that I really want to drive home, because people don't remember everything. They typically remember about like 10, 20% of the information going forward. So what I try to do, at least my science to this art, would be to really drive home the take home, like really display the take home points effectively. And then I sort of go from a bottom up approach, and I go through what's the logical pathway, or what's the logical flow of information that makes my take home point make sense. So to answer your question, I know it's a more of a wishy-washy answer, and it's like it's everyone's style, but it is really hard to say that. It's really hard to really apply a science or a logical algorithm to designing infographics. There are a lot of studies that do talk about best practices and things that are better than others, like you mentioned. And I think we'll be covering that in the breakout rooms actually shortly, in terms of design strategies and how to analyze the literature. So we'll be able to go more into depth, because it is a pretty detailed topic, but hope to see you in the breakout room. I'd love to go further into this question. No problem.
Oh, and we'll be taking one last question from Alex for Apple and Bernie. So Alex asks, seeing students learning how to dissect a research article while visualizing the information, what kind of learning curve did you experience? Do you think visualizing the information could be also helpful for understanding a paper? So either Apple or Bernie, would you like to tackle this question, or both of you?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think there's a bit of a learning curve, which the literature review team here at Core kind of helps us a lot with, because they kind of read through the paper first, and they pick out the important parts that we need to put on the infographic. And so that kind of like does a lot of the work for us, and that's kind of like where we split the work in our team. But I definitely think that when you're reading a paper, it's sometimes hard, especially when you're staring at like a big wall of text, to like figure out what parts are important and what parts should really go on the infographic. So I definitely think that there's a bit of challenge to that. So I think that having an infographic there actually helps a lot with digesting a paper, because you can see the key points immediately jump out at you. Kind of like Sparsh said, he likes to represent the main ideas of the papers prominently on his infographics, and I definitely think that's very important when designing something like that.
Yeah, and just to add on a little bit, any of like the diagrams or like the timelines or tables that we had, I feel like that really helped in visualizing information, especially when, for example, like graphs or like trends, that kind of information, when portrayed in a visual way, I think can really aid in understanding. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for answering that question. That's actually the time that we've budgeted for this segment of the Q&A, but don't worry, we'll have like other interactive segments where you can ask the various members of the team here any burning questions you might have. And just like Sparsh said, we can continue this kind of discussion in our breakout rooms later on tonight for sure. So right now I'd like to move on to the next slide. So let me just do a rundown for the explanation of a contest that we are running tonight. So basically, we'll be running a contest for the purpose of applying what you've learned tonight about the importance of the infodemic and how to create graphic designs for scientific literature. So all the stuff that you've been hearing on repeat so much throughout tonight. So for this contest, you'll be using, like we've mentioned, Tidbit's tool to be designing your own infographic from one of 3 pre-chosen journal articles, which you should have been emailed, and we kind of flashed a slide for a tiny bit there. But what's the motivation behind this, you might ask? So we'll be giving out 3 $50 Amazon gift cards for a winner per each paper. And so you will be making your submissions for this contest directly onto Tidbit's platform, and we'll be giving you a rundown for how to do this properly all shortly. And the submission deadline for your infographic is 11:59 p.m. tonight. So as to not burn into your exam studying time or other parts of your week, we'd like to keep this encapsulated to tonight. And a team of judges from both Core and Tidbit will be determining a winning infographic for each journal. And let's talk a little bit about the 3 papers. So the next slide, we did this paper review on our social media, and if you cannot find the papers, they should have been also attached to the email you were sent detailing the event for tonight. But yeah, these are the 3 papers that you can select from to create your infographic for tonight. And if you have any questions about these papers, once you've had a look through and select the one that you want to focus on, we can definitely discuss and run through those questions and get those questions answered with the mentors who will be available to you in the breakout rooms. And next slide, we're going to move on to some common questions we thought you might have for the contest tonight. So can you work in teams? No, the contest will be on an individual basis because Tidbit's platform supports individual use and not yet team collaboration. So you will be you'll be creating your own infographic, but definitely feel free to discuss the creative process or ask any of the questions and get that collaborative component going in the breakout rooms for sure. And how many infographics do I make? You'll be making one infographic, so select one paper out of the 3 to create one infographic on. And where do you submit your work? So there will be a publish feature directly on Tidbit's site for you to make your submissions, and we will be checking the timestamps to make sure you submit on time. And something we'd like you to keep in mind is there are steps to this publish process, excuse me. So make sure you allot time for that when you are submitting your work. We don't want you to run out of time. And lastly, how do I access Tidbit's tool? So hopefully you've been able to sign up for Tidbit's account. If you cannot, make sure you message one of Tidbit's representatives here. So either Ansh, Shubham, or Dhruvan, as well as Sparsh, and we will try to get that sorted for you as soon as possible. So yeah, you will be accessing their tool through their website. So I hope this rundown has cleared up any of the questions you might have had about the contest portion we are running tonight. And I'd like to move on to give you guys that demonstration of how you use Tidbit's tool, the editing process, and the publishing process. So one of the representatives from Tidbit will be giving you guys that run through.
Alrighty, is this the part where we can sort of run through the tool and how to access
that'd be awesome.
Cool. Let me share my screen here. Oh, I can't share my screen. It says host disabled, participant screen share.
One moment, we'll make you co-host.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry about that.
I think Rudra or Alex, if you can make co-host.
Oh, it worked. It's working.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. Here's my screen. Everyone, all good?
Yep.
All right. So, let me move this out of the way. This is sort of our main homepage. And to sign up, you just go over here. And I'm already logged in, so I'm going to log out for a second, and then I click sign up. And you'll get into the sign up page right over here. You do have to sign up with your institutional email, so either a UWO or your IV email. The reason being is we try to gatekeep a Tidbit to either individuals who have a university degree or in a university program, just to make sure that no one, like, it's not just some random person creating an infographic. And then once you sign up, you should be logged in. So, but I'm going to log myself in. And essentially, you'll end up on this page, which is our feed of the different infographics that people have created on our platform. And where you want to go is to this Create Tidbit button over here. And what you're going to do is click this one over here. So you want to click, because we're running this as a contest, you want to click this one right over here, this big button that highlights in blue, and you want to keep this as an unpublished paper, and type in the title of the paper that you've selected for the contest. You can enter the first author, that's about it, and then enter the journal name, and then as soon as you click Create Tidbit, you'll be popped into our tool. I can show you an example of an infographic that I worked on earlier. So this is one that I made. It's more of a simple infographic, and I felt that because the information that's contained in the paper is a lot complicated, even in the abstract, I tried to make it as simple as possible for people to really understand the take-home points, like I mentioned. Core, do you guys want me to sort of go through in some sort of like style tips and things like that, or is that enough?
I think if you kind of maybe even using this one as an example, if you can kind of like highlight sort of like the breaking down the scientific literature aspect of the paper, and then elements of graphic design that you think are really crucial for the process.
Of course. So I'll tell you how I went about it. So with every infographic that's linked to a paper, you'll get a link to the full text. You won't do it for the custom one, but I believe you guys all have the links to the full article either way. And then, so this was the, I'm going to try and zoom in my screen over here, but this is the abstract that I worked with. And when I read this was actually so complicated to understand, because they didn't really, in my opinion, didn't do a really good job of really breaking down the results of the study. So what I did was I started with the conclusion, because I know that this is what they want people to know right over here. So I actually started from the bottom and put this line in, because I know that that's what they want people to read. And then I tried to dissect how they came to this conclusion. So a few things stood out. I first tried to read exactly who the participants were. I realized that they tried to make 3 different groups. So right off the bat, that made a lot of sense. And then I looked at the outcome measures that they were reporting. And the key outcome measures that they were talking about was something called a hazard ratio. And that's a statistical measure that compares the incidence rate of an outcome to the baseline, or to another comparison. And so I was looking at both, they mentioned the crude mortality rate, and they also looked at the hazard ratios. And from there, I decided that the one that really demonstrates their points is the hazard ratio. And if you, again, like I said, this results section is really compressed, and they really tried to squish in a lot of information. But what I took from this were these numbers over here, and I knew that they were doing 2 groups. So if you read it, it says during 24 years of follow-up, there were about 1975 premature deaths that were documented with either irregular or long menstrual cycles. So what I understood from this study was that they were trying to see whether a long menstrual cycle or an irregular menstrual cycle would result in premature death. And they defined premature death as before 70 years. So right off the bat, I knew what they were looking for, what their outcome measures are, and what the groups they were comparing. And so if you go back to this, I knew that they were looking at irregular menstrual cycles and long menstrual cycles. So I could start from there and clearly outline that. I knew some of the descriptive statistics that they wanted to include. So 24 years of follow-up and about 80,000 participants in the study. And then it looked like that they were breaking things down into these different age groups: 14 to 17, 18 to 22, and 29 to 46. So I knew that was the next breakdown that needed to occur from the high level 2 groups that were assigned. And so it was very easy for me to then show these 3 different groups. And then reading the paper, I also found that they didn't really analyze the 14 to 17-year-old group within long menstrual cycles. So I eliminated that, and I looked at their outcome. So their primary outcome was crude mortality per 1,000 years, and the hazard ratio. And what the hazard ratio compares is the state of either irregular or long menstrual cycles to something that wasn't irregular or wasn't long. And I knew that these were the numbers that they wanted to show. Anything above 1 indicated that having either something, a irregular menstrual cycle in this age group would be a 1.4 times increase in premature death compared to women who have regular cycles. So I knew that these are the numbers that needed to be highlighted, and I threw them in there. And when I went back to the study, it also sounds like at the bottom, they wanted to show that the relationship was stronger with those with cardiovascular disease and also stronger with individuals who are current smokers. So I knew that those were important points because it was in the abstract and the author really wanted to convey that. And so I made 2 boxes at the bottom just to highlight these points because it was important to the study. And then I had my conclusion already. And what I made sure was the color scheme lined up. For example, if I was doing a paper on a cardiac disease, I would have possibly a red background. It's up to you, it's up to the designer. It's kind of just the color scheme that I went with, and I knew that these are the points that I wanted to hit home. One thing to sort of even add, if you wanted to add a bit more to this infographic, and one thing that I thought of was, what if I could even change the color of these numbers to reflect the level of hazard ratio? So for example, if I move this out of the way and I move this up to kind of get rid of it, and I take this number, and this is a hazard ratio. So this is something that I want to make possibly red. So I'll make, this is the highest number. I realize that 1.40 is the highest number within this group. And so I would make this, the color of this thing, the highest. And what I would do from there is I'd look at each one and I would go back to this color and I'd take this color, apply it to the 1.39, put that in there, and then just make it slightly more transparent because it was 1.39. So I'll go at 90%. And then I go to the 1.37, which was the next number. I'd still use the same color there, but make it even a bit more lighter in shade. Next one will be 1.34. Do the exact same thing, make it a bit lighter, and then last one, the lightest. And so this is a way to use color schemes and color scales to display numeric information in a visual manner. And it's intuitive because people can understand that the higher number is a bit more brighter in red compared to the lower number. And I actually like just looking at this infographic, I really like this bar on this right now. I'm going to try and center it. And I actually might just keep it there and keep it like this. And so a lot of the graphic design process also happens while you're making it and you realize what looks good. And to me, I think that looked good. And essentially what I can do, and a couple of more things, I won't get into it just for the sake of time, but I can also add an icon here to characterize the 78,000 women. So I can just add like a sort of black icon of like a shadow outline of a woman, and 24 years of follow-up, I could put like a calendar and put 24 in there to indicate that. So there's a lot of things you can do to spice up the infographic to convey information more effectively. But these are the kind of things that I think about. And I think Core touched on the refining process as well. Once you have the information and you have the infographic ready, you can refine it and make it look better. And yeah, that's pretty much what I would do. And the final step, so once you guys make your infographic within the time scale, I believe before midnight, what you do is you would hit publish over here. And here there's a verification step to the publishing because we get authors and different types of users creating infographics. What I'd recommend is just click the last one. I require Tidbit to complete the verification for me. It's the easiest one to do. And then just hit publish. And once this bar goes through, it'll be published right to your profile and we'll be able to take a look at it and see how you did. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Any questions?
It was really cool for me to see how you went like back and forth from the abstract to like include those aspects in the infographic. That was definitely very intuitive. Thank you for like clearly showing that through. I actually have a question. Like, how would you, so this is something that you've already started, that's on your profile, that is like a draft that you haven't yet published. But what about for people starting from scratch? How would you like create like a completely new infographic for the delegates today?
Totally, great question. So like I mentioned, I started from the conclusion because I kind of just put the conclusion at the bottom because I knew that needed to be there and that's what people needed to take home. And then after doing that, the first step that I did was I tried to dissect the paper and try to really understand what's going on, because reading the abstract the first time, it actually didn't make sense to me. So I read it a couple times and I tried to play down in my head as like, what is the most logical way to break down this information? And you could have done it another way. Like you could have started with the different age groups at the top and then the 2 different cycle types that they studied. I went this way because I sort of like the pyramid approach where I can start with the smallest number at the top and then break it down as it goes along. And I knew that there were key pieces of information that I wanted to put in there, specifically the idea behind the higher mortality with smoking and cardiovascular disease. So at that point, I knew the information that I wanted to put on there, and I knew the information that the numbers that I needed to convey. Once I had all that and I knew exactly what made intuitive sense, I just started from the top and started going. So I started with the 2 arms. I made the arrows, I made the different groups. Once I had a layout of the different groups, I added the numbers. And then I added the other ancillary information in the 4 corners. So the cardiovascular stuff, the smoking stuff. And then I think partway through, just like as I was doing this right now, I thought that maybe there's a better way to show these numbers using a transparency scale. And that's pretty much how I went through it. It's just more so refining it over and over again. But I think the key thing for me, and everyone's gonna have a different style, but the key thing for me was conclusion first, then try to understand and break down what exactly is going on, what makes sense to you in your head, what would really make sense to a reader in terms of flow, and then put that flow on, make sure you're including all the information that you want. Once all that's on the actual canvas, it's much more easier to manipulate things, to move things around, see what looks good, see what works for you and what's appealing to the eye. But I think the hardest step is understanding what information goes on the canvas. Once you've gone that down, it should be relatively straightforward. I'd say this whole thing from start to end took me probably an hour, hour and a half to pull off.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, no, thank you for clearing that up. It's definitely very interesting to hear about. Does anybody else have questions about using this tool or the creation process that Sparsh described? Feel free to, again, enter them into the chat and we'll get your questions answered.
Hey, Vicky, did you want us to kind of go over the different features that you see on the left pane over there?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that'd be great for
Yeah.
everyone to kind of hear about for sure. Yeah.
For sure. So over here we have a bunch of different icons. So you can search for anything, like I search for like hospital. I get a few icons for hospital, and basically it's integrated with Noun Project. So icons that live on Noun Project are automatically imported in. And so I can just click on it and it should import in just like that. You can also use the upload feature. So sometimes we don't have a graph feature in it. Sometimes if you make a graph on, let's say, like PowerPoint or Excel, you can just copy and save that graph and upload it directly onto the canvas. We have different types of lines. So you can have straight, dashed, you can have like a dashed arrow, whole different type, like I use a dashed arrow over here. So you can just throw that on the canvas as well. It'll show up. We also have layers for those of you who use Photoshop and a bit more advanced graphic design skills. You can change the layers of the different elements on the canvas. And then finally, text is pretty intuitive, and search just lets you search for the different elements that we have. On the right-hand side will be the properties of whatever you include. So if it's like a text, you can change the text top, you can change the font over here. If it's some sort of icon that you use, you can also change that as well. So the right side is just the properties. You can change properties of a line as well. You can change like the thickness of the line, the opacity, those kinds of things. And last but not least that I want to highlight is that because our tool is in a beta stage right now, and I know that some people have graphic design experience or are comfortable using other tools like PowerPoint or Photoshop, what we have is an import infographic feature. So you can make your entire infographic on something else if you prefer, and the header and footer will automatically stay there. So you don't have to worry about that part. You just make this middle body part. And essentially what you can do is, as long as the pixel length of the final product is 800 pixels, you can upload it directly and it will automatically integrate into the canvas. So that's another cool feature that we have. And then here you can add panes above and below. So for example, let's say like I want to separate background, methods, conclusion. I can add a second pane that's not related to this first pane. And then it's easy for me to like manipulate and put items on this pane, make this pane longer or shorter, that kind of stuff. So, and then you can always save your work over here. So if you click save and you want to get back to it, this will save. You can download it and then you can preview your work clicking that button over there.
And I just wanted to add that we have a YouTube playlist of like all of the different features that Sparsh just went over.
Guys, a reminder that the submission deadline is 11:59 p.m. Eastern time tonight. So if you're in a different time zone just by chance. And again, you can make your submissions by publishing straight on to BIT's website. And yeah, that is it from us tonight. We really hope that you met some cool people and had some good conversations at the event tonight. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed hearing about our organizations. And if you would like to stay updated with Core and Tidbit, you can find us on social media, or we have linked the websites in the presentation slides as well. But yeah, thank you so much for everybody who came out tonight. We really appreciate your presence and hope you had a really good time and gained something out of this event. But yes, it was so good to see you.
Right. Thank you, everyone. Oh, sorry, Sparsh, you go ahead.
No worries. I was just going to say thank you for hosting this. This is fantastic. And thanks all of you for coming out. It's great that you're interested in this kind of stuff. And I do think that'd be very helpful, even down the road, just learning about this, just having a bit of information on this and being able to communicate medical, health, and scientific information will do wonders for you down the career. So it's really amazing to see that you have this kind of interest. And big shout out to Core for hosting this.
No, thank you, Sparsh. I also really enjoyed this partnership with Tidbit, and thank you so much again for coming out tonight. And so that really concludes the end of our event, but of course the competition still goes on to midnight. So we want to say thank you to everyone who came out tonight, and good luck, and we'll see you guys around soon.